Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, United States. She grew up in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Known for her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced adulthood early. At the age of 16, she became pregnant but was determined to be a good mother. Danielle's relationship with Carl, the father of her child, ended in divorce. In 1996, she gave birth to her son Tristan at the age of 17, and despite the difficulties ahead, Danielle was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. Then she met Luis Payano, a man who would become Tristan's father. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers, initially as friends, but their relationship developed into love. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan, and for a time, it seemed like all their problems had been solved. The couple moved in together, and Danielle secured an office job at a landscaping company, a position she was proud to have obtained. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. Her life was on the right track, with a loving son, a fiancé, and promising career prospects. On March 15, 1999, Luis returned home from work to find his fiancée, 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, lying lifeless on the bed in their Ashley Lakes apartment in Norcross, Georgia. Their young son, Tristan, was at daycare at the time. Luis immediately realized Danielle was dead due to her skin color and called 911. When the police arrived, Luis was waiting for them and reported what he had found. He explained that upon entering the apartment, he saw Danielle lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered she was dead. The police naturally suspected Luis, and they took him in for questioning while a team of officers thoroughly examined the crime scene. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed. Fully clothed, with a sock around her neck, this suggested that the perpetrator intended to kill her, leaving no chance for survival. The fact that the stocking was tied at the back indicated that the perpetrator was behind Danielle when they strangled her. The crime scene showed signs of disarray, with the bed messed up and a dresser drawer open. It's possible that the perpetrator took the stocking from Danielle's drawer. The contents of her purse had been dumped and rummaged through, leading police to consider the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, several valuable items, including cameras and jewelry, were left untouched. This led police to speculate that the perpetrator may have intended to steal something but encountered Danielle and decided to kill her to avoid being identified as a witness. The lack of forced entry at the front door and the locked sliding glass door in the backyard raised suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged. Despite searching the surrounding area, police found no evidence. After investigating the crime scene, police discovered that Danielle may have let the killer into her home voluntarily or that the killer had a key to the apartment. As a result, the prime suspect became Danielle's fiancé, Luis Payano. When police started questioning Luis, he displayed intense emotions. The police were aware that romantic relationships can sometimes escalate into anger, leading to devastating consequences. To begin the interrogation, they asked Luis about his whereabouts on the day of Danielle's death. Luis claimed he spent the entire day at work. He last saw Danielle when they both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but she returned briefly to retrieve something. According to Luis, Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management at work and seemed slightly distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload. Luis tried to contact Danielle later that day but couldn't reach her. Concerned, he called her co-workers, who told him she had gone out for lunch but failed to return to work. Luis then contacted their home, where he spoke to someone named Lise, who also hadn't heard from Danielle. Luis left work to check on Danielle at their home in the Ashley Lakes apartments. When he arrived, he found something unsettling: the front door was unlocked. Upon entering, he saw a jar on the floor. During the investigation into Danielle's death, police questioned Luis about his relationship with her. They asked if the couple had frequent arguments or domestic problems. Luis insisted that their relationship was good and that they loved each other very much. Clearly feeling confused, he became frustrated with the questioning, believing that the police were wasting their time by focusing on him. He insisted that they should find the real culprit, who was still at large. Police also spoke to Danielle's friends and family, all of whom sided with Luis. Luis and Danielle were madly in love and were planning their wedding. However, their happiness did not last long. During the investigation into Danielle's case, Luis's co-workers confirmed that he had been at work all day, providing him with a solid alibi and eliminating him as a suspect. During the interrogation, Luis said that Danielle's co-worker Jeff was showing her too much attention and she was unhappy about it. The police immediately went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss. Danielle's boss confirmed to the police that Danielle had complained about an employee named Jeff. Jeff was a middle-aged man who was a manager at the company. Danielle complained to her boss that Jeff was constantly hanging around her, interfering with her work, and behaving inappropriately. There was a significant age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40 years old and she was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch and Danielle told him that she had a fiancé. She refused to go to lunch with Jeff. The company where Danielle worked took her complaints seriously. On the day of her murder, she had a meeting regarding a complaint she had filed with management against Jeff. She was very nervous about it. She feared that her career might be in jeopardy because she was a new employee and Jeff was her manager. Her co-workers mentioned that Danielle had gone home for lunch after this meeting but had not returned. That gave the police a time frame for when Danielle's attack occurred. The investigation revealed Jeff's involvement, especially when it was discovered that he was absent from the office at the time of the crime and did not return until later in the evening. Police focused on Jeff as a suspect, possibly following Danielle home and attacking her when she opened the door, which would explain the lack of signs of entry. Jeff was called in for questioning and asked to describe his relationship with Danielle. He admitted that he invited her to lunch but denied his involvement in her death. Jeff didn't deny liking her, however. He claimed he had not behaved inappropriately towards Danielle and was surprised when she filed a complaint against him. The investigators asked him if Danielle's complaint was a reason for wanting to harm her. His first reaction to this question was anger. He was adamant that he wasn't the one who took her life. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have been the one who attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to him, he was with another colleague, and they were driving around the city solving some work issues. They had been together all day, so he couldn't be the one who took Danielle's life. Jeff told investigators the name of the coworker whom he claimed he was with at the time of the crime. The detectives met with this man, and he confirmed Jeff's words, thus they excluded another person from the list of suspects. The next day, investigators received the autopsy report and examined it in the hope of getting some clues that would help them track down the perpetrator. The cause of Danielle's death was asphyxia. It seemed evident that Danielle's attack had taken her by surprise. The investigators concluded that someone had come up to her from behind and pulled the stocking tight until she lost consciousness. After that, the perpetrator tied the stocking in a knot so Danielle could not regain consciousness. There were no defensive injuries on her body. In fact, there were no injuries at all except for the ligature mark on her neck. Perhaps Danielle didn't even see the face of the one who attacked her. The police found no evidence at the crime scene that could help identify the perpetrator: no shoe prints, no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair. There was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police had no new suspects, they returned to the version that what happened was a robbery that went wrong. They asked Louise to go through the apartment with them again. He carefully examined everything and said that nothing was missing from the apartment. All the things seemed to be in their usual places. However, a few days later, Lou called the police and said he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. He also drew the attention of investigators to another strange detail: the stocking that someone strangled Danielle with did not belong to her. According to Louise, she didn't wear stockings at all. It meant that whoever had done it had brought the stocking with them. Lacking any evidence, the investigators decided to look into Danielle's past. Perhaps what happened to her was connected with her past. They asked her friends about her previous relationships, in particular, her relationship with Carl, the father of her son Tristan. Her best friend told the police about Danielle's ex-boyfriend Eddie. She started dating him when she was already pregnant. Eddie was a violent guy, and as their relationship progressed, he became more domineering and tried to control all aspects of her life. It got to the point where he forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie deteriorated even more after Danielle gave birth to her son. Soon after, Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided it was time to end this relationship. She moved out and tried to start a new life, but Eddie had other plans. He did not accept rejection and behaved unpredictably. As a result, Danielle had to seek a restraining order against him. He violated it several times, called Danielle, parked near her house, and once even showed up at her work. Danielle's family told investigators that Eddie had called her several times in recent months. He told her to meet with him, but she always hung up. Eddie was the perfect suspect, so detectives tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The man was hostile, and he wasn't eager to go to the police station. However, Eddie had an alibi. He said that Eddie was towing cars out of state at the time of the murder and that Eddie's boss, along with service logs and other receipts, could back him up. When the police confirmed his alibi, they released Eddie. 3 days after Danielle died, Danielle's neighbor, Kirk, called the police and told them about something that had happened to Kirk the week before the murder. Ms. Kirk said that recently in the apartment complex, residents often encounter a maintenance worker. The maintenance worker said he came to do a repair order. However, Ms. Kirk said that she felt very uncomfortable the whole time he was there because he kept staring at Kirk, as if he was more concerned with her than completing the repair order. The same thing happened to another woman. The maintenance worker insisted that he was there to change a light bulb, when the landlord said there were no bulbs to change. He mumbled and staggered, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," then backed up and walked away. Police investigations revealed that the complex had several maintenance workers, but the one who matched the descriptions of both women was Calvin Oliver, 42. According to records, Calvin had only started working at the complex in September 1998. At the time of Danielle's murder, 10 residents had reported cash, checks, and other valuables, including jewelry, computers, and guns, missing from their apartments without evidence of forced entry. Some even suggested that someone on the maintenance staff was responsible. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by the police, who initially asked him about a series of burglaries at the Ashley Lakes apartments. Calvin denied any involvement in the burglaries. When asked about Danielle Jennings, he said he had heard about what happened to her but did not know her. The only thing he confessed was that he had worked in her apartment. The police were about to release Calvin for lack of concrete evidence when they ran a final check of Calvin's database. The results were horrifying. They discovered that Calvin had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a theft charge related to the theft of a personal check. According to Georgia Department of Correction records, Calvin had a long-standing adult criminal record dating back to 1974. His convictions included multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery by force, and at least one count of forcibly pressuring a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, Calvin spent the majority of his life incarcerated. Given his extensive criminal history, it's surprising he was able to get a job at Ashley Lake's apartments. The police took Calvin Oliver into custody, which allowed them to thoroughly investigate his potential involvement in Danielle Jennings's death. As part of their ongoing inquiry into a string of thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. During the search, they discovered stolen items from other residents. And the police discovered Danielle's wedding ring in his home. This discovery directly linked Oliver to Danielle's death. When the police questioned him about the wedding ring, Calvin claimed that he had stolen it about 3 weeks before Danielle's death. However, this claim was proven false. Calvin became a suspect and refused to cooperate with police after being caught lying. At trial, the prosecution argued that Calvin killed Danielle after she caught him breaking into her home. After a 5-day trial that ended on October 13, 2000, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. As a result, Calvin Oliver received a life sentence for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for the burglary. A subsequent investigation revealed that Ashley Lake Apartments management knew about Calvin's history of run-ins with the law and his lengthy criminal record. Despite this knowledge, they failed to conduct thorough background checks and failed to warn other residents when a series of burglaries occurred. When these facts came to light, Danielle's family filed a lawsuit against Ashley Lake Apartments that they argue that the evidence demonstrates a reckless disregard for the safety of others. After a trial, a jury returned a verdict of more than $13 million for Danielle's wrongful death. The complex's key policy was also flawed, prosecutors said. Employees had access to house keys, and the lockboxes containing keys to the complex's 240 apartments were often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is now serving a life sentence in prison. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Nicole Lobby. Nicole Lobby, 29 years old, lives with her husband Chris and has a large family in Oregon, USA. Nicole was a beautiful woman, loving wife, amazing mother, and a friend. All she was not afraid to share her faith or her opinion with anyone. Her goal was to make sure that she left this world a better place. When Nicole met Chris, she already had an older daughter. Chris also had 2 daughters, and after they got married, they had a son. Nicole is known for being adventurous, brave, and always looking forward. She overcame a rare cancer and then became very passionate about fitness. Nicole's goal is to become a fitness trainer. Nicole recently started a new job, and no one thought she would be in danger at work. At about 5 p.m. on August 19, 2014, Portland Emergency Services received a call from a man reporting that a woman had been stabbed in the chest. The victim was still alive but had difficulty breathing. So the witness requested that an ambulance be sent to Timber Creek Apartments as soon as possible. Police quickly arrived and spoke with the man who called 911, who gave more details about the incident. He said he and his wife were walking down the stairs of their apartment building to the parking lot when they heard screaming. He turned to his right and saw a woman running toward them, screaming, "He stabbed me, he stabbed me." She told the couple she didn't know the attacker, but he was wearing camouflage pants and a black hoodie. The manager of Timber Creek Apartments identified the victim as Nicole Lobby, 29, a coworker. Nicole was a leasing consultant and had been working there for several weeks. On August 19, during her work hours, she drove a trolley around the complex delivering letters asking for lease renewals. Along with each letter, Nicole gave each resident a balloon tied to a bag of popcorn. When she was done, she marked each apartment on a map in the trolley. Based on Nicole's notes and the map, detectives determined that the attack may have occurred on a specific stairwell in Timber Creek at the time residents heard Nicole screaming. The attacker may have been waiting for her under this stairwell. There was also a trail of blood from the stairwell and flyers scattered at the bottom of the stairs. During the Washington County Sheriff's Office investigation, several witnesses reported seeing a suspicious young man wearing a black hoodie and camouflage pants near Timber Creek at the time of the attack. Combining the reports and the timing of the sightings, detectives determined the suspect's route through Timber Creek. More than 20 officers were involved in this intensive investigation, assisted by canine dogs. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team searched the woods along Cedar Mill Creek, a stream that runs through the Timber Creek residence. During the search, they found several items that were sent to a lab for analysis. Detectives did not disclose the exact findings but said they were investigating every possibility. Investigators are trying to figure out what caused the attack, which took place in broad daylight at an apartment complex with more than 1,000 residents. They have contacted Nicole's husband, Chris Lobby, and informed him of the incident. The police took several steps to identify the attacker. It was not a robbery, and the attacker did not attempt to remove her clothing. This suggested that the motive for the murder might have been a personal dispute. This theory led detectives to her husband, Chris. Chris cooperated with the police and answered questions about his 4-year marriage to Nicole. Investigations revealed that he was at daycare picking up his son at the time of the attack. Therefore, Chris could not have been the attacker. Meanwhile, while interviewing residents at Timber Creek Apartments, the police found 2 more witnesses who saw a man wearing a black hoodie and orange pants. They saw this man, who had similar features to the suspect, running across the street without looking back. Around the same time the attack on Nicole took place, a hooded man was seen running toward the houses across from Timber Creek Apartments. Detectives, working with witnesses, drew up a sketch of the suspect and quickly circulated it throughout the city, even appearing on television news. The city urged anyone who recognized the familiar facial features to report the incident. Detectives also worked with informants to find clues about the killer. The sketch led to several leads. A man said his son knew a man who matched the sketch. His name was Taylor, and he had recently threatened others with a knife. Police found Taylor and brought him in for questioning. Taylor said strange things and seemed to have mental problems. When asked about Nicole, he did not hesitate to admit that he had killed her. However, Taylor's testimony was inconsistent, as he only mentioned information that had already been in the newspaper and gave irrelevant details. As a result, the police eliminated him as a suspect. After the sketch of the suspect appeared in the newspaper, the police received a tip about a man named Nick who had a criminal history. Nick looked similar to the suspect in the sketch. However, he had never done anything similar to what happened to Nicole. He had run-ins with the law before, but he had never physically harmed anyone. The police interviewed Nick and found his behavior disturbing. When asked about Nicole and the crime, he denied any involvement and asked for a lawyer. The police then obtained a search warrant for Nick's home. They found a black hoodie and orange pants, but the hoodie did not match the witness description because it had a bright white logo on the front. Nick's clothes were sent for analysis, but no evidence was found linking him to the crime. Nick's phone records also showed that he was not near the scene of the attack. As a result, the police eliminated Nick as a suspect, and the case went cold. Nicole's family is going through a very difficult time. In an interview with reporters, Chris Lobby shared that he can't stop thinking about what happened to Nicole. He said, "The hard thing is that there are so many unanswered questions. I keep thinking about what happened, different scenarios, and there are no answers to any of them." The police were concerned that the perpetrator might strike again, and their worries became a reality. 3 weeks after Nicole's death, on September 13, 2014, the Eugene Police Department received an alarming call. Eugene is a city about 100 miles from Portland. On that day, a resident was attacked while leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium. Heather Miller, 39, had gone to a bar near the stadium to watch the game. Around 8 p.m., when the game ended, Heather decided to go home. The streets were almost deserted. As she left the bar, she tried to call a taxi but realized her phone was dead. So she decided to walk closer to the stadium to catch one more easily. As she walked along the sidewalk, she noticed someone following her. As she crossed the street and turned around, she saw the man behind her was still following her. She walked faster but was suddenly hit in the back of the head, knocking her unconscious. When she woke up, she found herself face to face with her attacker, who had pulled down her pants in an attempt to sexually assault her. Heather tried to reason with her attacker. She said she had a daughter and begged to see her again, but he continued to beat her. Heather described that every time she spoke, she was punched in the face. Eventually, Heather realized that the only way to survive was to pretend to be dead. She closed her eyes and remained silent. When the attacker thought he had achieved his goal, he ran away. Despite the brutal beating, Heather found the strength to stand up and go out into the street. A minute later, a car stopped and the driver called 911. An ambulance arrived and rushed her to the hospital. Heather regained consciousness and spoke to a detective who arrived shortly afterward. At this time, neither of them knew that the attacker had been arrested at the police station. There was a park near the scene of the attack. A police officer on duty that night saw a man running, stopped him, and saw that his hands and shoes were bloody. The police arrested him and called a patrol car to take him to the station. Jamie Tinoco, 17, was young but had been noticed by the police many times. At the time of his arrest, he was on probation for illegal possession. Jamie had been using drugs since he was 12, and his parents had no control over him. Jamie had dropped out of high school since his freshman year and was arrested for driving without a license the day before the attack on Heather but was released shortly after. During questioning, Jamie confessed to attacking Heather. The man was completely calm and nonchalant, believing he had done nothing wrong. His actions led the Eugene Police Department to suspect that Heather was not his first victim. Police released his photo, hoping that other women affected by him would come forward. Soon after, detectives investigating Nicole Lobby's death saw a photo of Jamie released by Eugene Police. They believed Jamie matched the sketch of the suspect they had. Further investigation revealed that Jamie lived with his parents in Portland and that their apartment was across the street from Timber Creek, which further fueled their suspicions that he was involved in Nicole Lobby's death. Detectives questioned Jamie about Nicole's case, hoping that he would admit to assaulting her, as he had confessed to attacking Heather Miller. However, Jamie insisted that he had nothing to do with Nicole's death and refused to answer questions. Police needed to find evidence to link him to Nicole Lobby's death. As mentioned earlier, Jamie lived across the street from his parents at Timber Creek Apartments. As a result, the police obtained a search warrant for his parents' apartment. They found a black hoodie and orange pants in Jamie's room and sent them to a lab for analysis. However, the lab results were disappointing, with no trace of Nicole's DNA on any of Jamie's belongings, and the investigation seemed to hit a dead end. While there is no evidence to prove that Jamie killed Nicole, there is enough evidence to link him to the attack on Heather Miller. He did not deny his actions and seemed proud of being a young thug. At his trial in connection with the attack on Heather Miller, he smiled and said he had no remorse for his actions. Jamie had broken away from a group of delinquent teens on a trip supervised by the Washington County Juvenile Department. He followed Heather, attacked her from behind, and dragged her into the bushes near Atson Stadium. Heather said she still has nightmares and flashbacks and chipped her front teeth after the attack. She has had to find a new job. The injuries she suffered in the attack, including a broken nose, required reconstructive surgery to recover. "There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about what happened," she said in Lane County District Court. I pray that Jamie will never have the opportunity to do this to another person and impact their life the way he impacted mine. Heather Miller held hands with 2 family members as she sat with more than a dozen supporters before reading her statement aloud. Jamie grinned in court as the victim recounted the horrifying details of the attack she endured. When the judge asked why Jamie was smiling, he replied that he did not know. The judge called Jamie's lack of remorse appalling and labeled him a danger to the community, then imposed the maximum sentence. Heather, comforted by friends and family after the hearing, said, "His behavior was disrespectful and unrepentant, and the judge's sentence was fully deserved." A courageous mother of 2, Heather pleaded with the judge that Jamie would never have the opportunity to harm another person. She did not want him to think he had won and brought her down. So she kept her composure from the start. Although the defense tried to portray Jamie as a young man who had been affected by substance abuse for years, the judge noted that his behavior in court clearly reflected character issues. Jamie's lawyer asked the judge to sentence his client to 8 years and 4 months in prison, arguing that Jamie was remorseful for what he had done. However, Jamie did not apologize when the judge allowed him to speak. He refused to make any statements. Judge Deborah Vogt sentenced Jamie to 14 years and 2 months in prison, explaining that his lack of remorse justified the harsh sentence. "The community needs to be protected from a dangerous man like this," she said. "As much as people want me to see him as a boy, I can't." When Jamie becomes eligible for release, he will be in his early 30s and will have to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. As for Heather, her family said she is looking forward to starting a new job and being able to move on with her life. Meanwhile, investigators decided to take advantage of Jamie's ego to get him to confess. They questioned him about Nicole Lobby's death. The detectives told him that he would get more respect in prison if the other inmates knew that he was not only the coward who attacked one woman from behind but also the one who killed another. After a few minutes of silence, Jamie began talking about Nicole, saying that he didn't mean to kill her. He wanted to feel the sensation of stabbing someone, but he didn't mean to kill Nicole, just hurt her. He said that when he was walking from his apartment to Timber Creek, he saw Nicole park her car and bring a balloon to her second-floor apartment. As Nicole climbed the stairs, he hid behind the car, then ran up the stairs and stabbed Nicole when she turned around. Jamie said he chose Nicole because he thought she would be an easy target. When asked if he would try to force Nicole to have sex, like he did with Heather Miller, he casually replied, "Oh, I've thought about it. I would." Jamie said he didn't do it because Nicole screamed when she stabbed him, so he ran away during the reenactment. Jamie showed investigators how he escaped the scene. Chris Lobby said he was shocked to learn that his wife's killer was only 17. "I have a 13-year-old daughter," he said. "It's unbelievable and hard to understand that someone 4 years older than her could do this." The trial began in 2015. Despite confessing under questioning, Jamie has pleaded not guilty in court. His attorney argued that there was no DNA evidence linking him to the scene. "I'm just asking for leniency for a 17-year-old boy with a serious mental illness who has the potential to change with treatment," defense attorney Robert Axford said. The defense's only witness was a psychologist who evaluated Jamie and determined he had symptoms of schizophrenia. However, a psychologist at Oregon State Hospital determined that Jamie had a personality disorder, not schizophrenia. His video confession and reenactment convinced the jury of Jamie's guilt. During his reenactment, he described details that only Nicole Lobby's attacker would know. During the sentencing phase, the jury had 2 options: life in prison without parole or life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years. The jury determined that there were no mitigating circumstances sufficient to impose a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 30 years. As a result, in 2017, Jamie Tinoco was found guilty on all counts. Jamie, then 20, stood in the Washington County courtroom between his two attorneys when Court of Appeals Judge Kirsten Thompson asked him if he had anything to say before she formally sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He put his hands down in front of his waistband, his mouth twitching slightly. "I beg for forgiveness," Jamie said before sitting down. Chris Lobby, Nicole's husband, said Jamie's family came to see his family after the sentencing to express their condolences and apologize. But that's not the end of the story. In 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned Jamie's 2017 conviction. Juvenile law has changed since Tinoco was tried on a Measure 11 charge. Under the new reform, offenders between the ages of 15 and 17 are no longer automatically sent to adult court. The new law requires prosecutors to hold a hearing to decide whether juveniles charged with serious crimes should be transferred to adult court. If the case is retried, Jamie's attorneys could ask for a lighter sentence. The decision to overturn the conviction came as a shock to Nicole Lobby's family, who were not expecting it. Nicole's father, Rich Jones, said they will have to go through another emotional ordeal. Jamie remains in prison, but this is not the end of Nicole Lobby's case. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Plass was born on December 11, 1990. She grew up in Chapee, Massachusetts, with her sister Emily and brother Nicholas. Amanda's mother, Michelle Mayes, described her daughter as a hippie and often joked that she was born in the wrong era. In 2011, Amanda worked as a waitress at a Friendly's in Chapee and was dating a 27-year-old carpenter named Seth Green. On August 26, 2011, Seth called 911 to report that he had found Amanda unconscious in the kitchen of her third-floor apartment. During the call, Seth tearfully told the operator that when he arrived, Amanda was lying on the floor, unresponsive, with multiple stab wounds to her body. He did not know how to help and requested the police and an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Amanda had died from multiple stab wounds, including to her chest, throat, and abdomen. Police cordoned off the home where the crime took place. When they arrived, they found Seth on the porch, crying and unable to calm down. Detectives carefully searched Amanda's apartment. Whoever the perpetrator was, they had escaped but left behind some evidence. The first thing that caught the detectives' attention was the large amount of blood in the kitchen, indicating that the attack had been carried out with a knife. Police also found Nike shoe prints on the floor and handprints on the broken glass window. The motive for this brutal murder remains a mystery. Based on the condition and number of Amanda's injuries, detectives suspect that she may have known her attacker and that the motive was a personal vendetta. Therefore, the first suspect was Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green. Police took Seth Green in for questioning. It was no surprise that he was the first suspect, given his close relationship with the victim, his blood-stained clothing, and his role in calling 911. The fact that he and Amanda had been dating for less than 2 weeks before her death, and that her family barely knew him, raised suspicions. Seth was 7 years older than Amanda and likely had different views on some issues. But did that lead to an argument that resulted in the brutal crime? This led investigators to suspect that Seth could be the killer, even though he claimed Amanda was dead before he arrived at her apartment. They determined that about 2 hours had passed between Amanda's death and Seth calling 911. That was enough time to cover up evidence and remove the weapon. So the first question detectives had to answer was whether Seth Green had anything to do with Amanda's death. When Seth showed up at the police station, he looked like he had just been through something terrible. He was mourning the death of his girlfriend. Investigators wanted to know if his feelings were genuine or if he was just trying to deflect suspicion from himself. During questioning, Seth said he had been working all day. He had planned to take Amanda to the restaurant where she worked, but couldn't because of his busy schedule. Seth said he didn't know Amanda well because they weren't in a long-term relationship, but he loved her and had no reason to hurt her. Seth worked as a carpenter at a construction site. Investigators began asking him about his tools, implying that he may have used one of them to commit the crime. Seth often used a tool belt at work, which contained a variety of carpentry tools, including a knife. However, he claimed that he always put the tool belt back after work, and that day was no exception. Seth finished the job, changed his clothes and tools, and then went to see Amanda. He understood why he was the most suspected, but he still insisted that he had nothing to do with his girlfriend's death. The police eventually confirmed Seth's alibi. He even passed a lie detector test. When he arrived at the scene, he was wearing construction shoes, which clearly did not match the Nike shoe prints at the scene. In addition, his shoe size was much larger. And the fingerprints on the glasses did not belong to him. With these facts, the police eliminated him as a suspect. Because Amanda tried to resist, she inflicted injuries on the perpetrator. The perpetrator likely suffered scratches on his body in the first weeks after the crime, as a piece of skin belonging to the perpetrator was found under Amanda's fingernails, an important piece of evidence that the police had hoped for. However, when they tested the DNA sample, they found no match in the database. The motive for the crime remains unclear, as many of the items in Amanda's room were still intact. With no signs of forced entry, the police have two theories as to how the criminals entered the house. Amanda may have known them and let them in, or she may have forgotten to lock the door. Investigators interviewed Amanda's co-workers and friends and discovered that the case may have involved a love triangle. Before dating Seth, Amanda had been in a relationship with someone else, and the breakup was not smooth because Amanda initiated it. After a while, she started dating Seth, and Amanda's ex-boyfriend did not seem to be happy with this. Jealousy sometimes leads people to act rashly with serious consequences. Investigators checked the information but found this theory to be unlikely. Amanda's ex-boyfriend provided his DNA and fingerprints, neither of which matched the traces found on her body or at the scene. Furthermore, he had a convincing alibi. Police investigated other leads but failed to find a solution to Amanda's death, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Amanda's family was determined to find justice, so they distributed flyers and held community events in the hope that someone would come forward with vital information. Amanda's mother, Michelle, said her daughter was not perfect, but she did not understand why Amanda died and why no one had reported any useful information to the police. Amanda's family faced another emotional challenge. They discovered that several police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body on their phones and shared them with others, including civilians. According to an internal report, Sergeant Keith Lame, a senior officer who was in charge of monitoring the scene at 73 School Street, where Amanda was stabbed to death on August 26, 2011, was one of the photographers. He sent the photos from his cell phone to another sergeant, who then forwarded them to a patrol officer. One officer shared the photo with civilians, including a coach at a youth soccer game. Records show that Keith used his cell phone to take the photo. Keith then forwarded the photo to Sergeant Jeffrey Godair. Sergeant Jeffrey emailed the photo to Patrolman Chad Levesque. Patrolman Chad shared the photo of Amanda, lying on the kitchen floor, with other soccer coaches. As he did so, Chad said, "This is something I have to deal with at work." The photo was shown to at least 3 coaches at a youth soccer game in Agawam the day after the murder, according to Captain William Jebb, the internal affairs officer who wrote the report. At that time, Patrolman Terry Deck, who was assigned to record all traffic in the apartment for state police, took a photo of Amanda's body and emailed it separately to 6 Chicopee police officers. The investigation found that all 6 officers deleted the emails. None of them were punished for wrongdoing, and their names were not listed on criminal records. The others were punished for incompetence and failure to meet work standards. Terry and Keith, who took the photos, received letters of reprimand. Jeffrey and Chad were docked wages. Nearly 2 years after the murder, there was no sign that the investigation was any closer to finding the culprit. So investigators decided to review all the relevant evidence, hoping to find some missing information. After reviewing the evidence and items in Amanda's bedroom, they discovered a dry erase board with a suspicious message. The message read, "Dennis was here on November 8th. Interestingly, November 8th was only about 2 weeks before Amanda's body was discovered. Investigators began to wonder about the man named Dennis and his role in the case. They began to investigate the relationship between Dennis and Amanda by examining phone records and social media posts. While investigating Amanda's apartment, police discovered that her ex-boyfriend had given them a crucial clue. He said that Amanda's apartment had been broken into several times during her absence. In particular, Amanda told him that she suspected a young Puerto Rican man whose name began with the letter D. However, she did not want to report the incident to the police and wanted to resolve the situation herself by talking to the man. Amanda tried to talk to the man about the break-in, but he would not listen. Amanda then informed him that a neighbor had witnessed him at her apartment. She also begged him to return items that were missing from her home. However, the man became angry and left. The main goal of the investigators was to identify Dennis and determine whether he was involved in Amanda's death. They discovered that a man named Dennis Rosa Roman lived near where Amanda died. A search of Dennis's records revealed that he had been convicted of burglary and breaking and entering. However, no fingerprints were found that matched the ones found at Amanda's home. Police tracked Dennis to Westfield, Massachusetts, and asked him to come to the police station to talk, but he refused. During the brief encounter, Dennis appeared very nervous. Surprisingly, Dennis turned himself into the police station in November 2013 at the age of 22. Police questioned Dennis about his connection to Amanda. Although Dennis admitted to knowing Amanda from Choppy, he said he had not seen her in several years. This made sense since Amanda had been dead for some time. Investigators then asked him if he had ever been to Amanda's apartment. He replied that he had never been there and did not really know her well. He only admitted that he sometimes sold Amanda marijuana and had had a few brief interactions with her. During questioning, Dennis agreed to provide an oral DNA sample and provided his shoe size. The results showed that his shoe size matched the shoes found at the crime scene. Officers also noted that Dennis was wearing a pair of Nike Air Max shoes, the same type as the shoes found at the scene but with a different sole pattern. After providing his DNA, Dennis refused to answer further questions and promised to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. Because there was insufficient evidence to arrest him, officers were forced to release him. This raised concerns that he might be attempting to flee, causing the investigation to stall. Further investigation revealed that Amanda had been in telephone contact with Dennis on July 28, 2011. She made 4 calls and received 5 calls from him. At the same time, Dennis changed his initial statement to police, admitting that he had spoken to Amanda at times. According to Dennis, Amanda told him that people frequently broke into her apartment when she was away, but she did not report it to the police because nothing of value was missing. However, investigators had heard this story many times before and now suspected Dennis was behind the break-ins. They believed he was hiding something, as his statement changed and lacked a clear explanation. When shown a photo of the dry erase board that read, "Dennis was here on November 8, 11, Dennis suddenly remembered writing it, contradicting his previous statement that he had never been in Amanda's apartment. Additionally, DNA testing revealed that his DNA matched DNA found under Amanda's fingernails and that his fingerprints were on a glass pane at the crime scene. This evidence confirmed Dennis's connection to the crime. After realizing that too much evidence was directly against him, Dennis changed his story again. He now claimed to have been present at the crime scene and tried to save Amanda from the attacker, implying that someone else was involved. When asked about the man's identity, Dennis refused, citing fear for his safety and that of his family. Instead, he provided a detailed description of the alleged perpetrator, a tall, 170 to 200-pound white male with light skin, blue eyes, wearing old pants and dirty boots, along with a t-shirt that read, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly?" Detectives did not believe Dennis's testimony, as all the evidence pointed to only one person being present at the crime scene when Amanda was stabbed. They arrested Dennis and charged him with the murder of Amanda Plass. The trial began in 2016, nearly 3 years later. Dennis's lawyers defended their client, arguing that although he was present at the crime scene, he was not responsible for Amanda's death. They accused the police of mishandling the investigation and framing Dennis after they failed to investigate thoroughly. Dennis claimed that on the day of Amanda's death, the drug dealer forced him to come to her apartment because Amanda owed the dealer $500 or $600. He claimed that the dealer started stabbing Amanda with a knife when things got bad. Dennis claimed that he wanted to intervene but was unable to stop the dealer. Dennis also claimed that Amanda had grabbed his hand, which is why his DNA was found under her fingernails. Prosecutors presented a different version of events. According to them, Dennis broke into Amanda's apartment while she was away and left a note with his name on her whiteboard. Amanda discovered this, suspected Dennis was the culprit, and called him to ask him to return her stolen belongings, which led to 9 phone calls between Amanda and Dennis. Prosecutors claimed that on the day of the murder, Dennis returned to Amanda's apartment thinking she was at work. However, Amanda had come home and a fight broke out, leading to Dennis killing her. A 12-person jury found Dennis guilty of causing the death of Amanda Plass in July 2016, after hearing 8 days of testimony and deliberating for 5 hours. The court sentenced Dennis to life in prison without parole. The police department's internal investigation into the scandal surrounding the release of Amanda's photo was delayed for years. However, in 2018, Officer Jeffrey Gaudier was finally fired in connection with the case. Although he appealed the decision, he returned to work in 2020. Due to his misconduct and previous disciplinary actions, a commission demoted him to patrol officer. Amanda's law went into effect in Massachusetts on August 4, 2022. The law makes it a misdemeanor for first responders to illegally take photos of a crime scene, punishable by up to a year in jail or a $2,000 fine. Amanda's family also filed a lawsuit against the city of Choppy, which was eventually settled out of court for $100,000. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ingrid Lane. Ingrid, a devoted mother and healthcare professional, was searching for companionship and romance in the modern world of online dating. Unaware, her quest for love would lead to a chilling encounter that would culminate in unimaginable horror. Ingrid Marilyn Lane, born on August 2, 1975, lived in Renton, Washington, with her 3 young daughters, just outside Seattle. She worked as a nurse at the Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, while managing life as a divorced parent, having recently separated from Philip, the father of her children. Custody arrangements were made to share parenting duties between Ingrid and Philip. Ingrid was described as a petite woman with a vibrant personality. She was deeply devoted to her daughters, willing to sacrifice anything to ensure their safety and well-being. On April 9, 2016, Philip, Ingrid's former spouse, visited their residence in Renton, King County, Washington. Despite their divorce, Philip and Ingrid maintained a cordial relationship to effectively co-parent their 3 children. Noelle, 10 years old, Brooke, 8 years old, and Reese, 6 years old at the time. Ingrid knew that Philip planned to bring the girls back to their apartment in Renton after spending the night with them. When Philip arrived at the house around 10 a.m., he noticed that Ingrid's Toyota Highlander was not in its usual spot in front of the house. Although Ingrid was supposed to be off duty from her job as a nurse at Seattle's Swedish Medical Center, she was expecting her daughters to return to her care that day. Philip was confident that Ingrid would have been home to welcome them. After several failed attempts to reach Ingrid by phone, Philip contacted Ingrid's mother, Jorga. Together, they entered the house using the key Jorga had. While searching the house, Jorga found Ingrid's purse, phone, and other personal belongings, including her driver's license, but there was no sign of Ingrid herself. It seemed unlikely that she would have left without notifying anyone. Concerned, Jorga decided to contact the authorities and report that Ingrid was missing. As the investigation progressed, the authorities reached out to Ingrid's friends and neighbors, learning that she had mentioned going on a date the previous night to one of them. Additionally, a neighbor mentioned that Ingrid had recently started seeing a man. Jorga and Philip were unaware of Ingrid's romantic involvement, but they shared a phone account, allowing Ingrid to access Jorga's call logs. Upon inspecting the logs, Jorga noticed multiple calls to the same Montana-based number. Suspicious, Ingrid's sister conducted some online investigation and discovered that the number belonged to a Facebook account registered to a man named John Robert Charlton. Concerned about her daughter's well-being, Jorga reached out to the number via text on Saturday, informing the recipient that she had contacted 911 to seek information about her daughter's whereabouts. John Charlton responded to Jorga's text with surprise, asking, "911, what's happening?" He then explained that he and Ingrid had attended a Mariners game the previous day, but did not spend the night together, as Ingrid needed to be up early to tend to her children. Despite Jorga's insistence that he speak to the police, John did not respond further. On April 9th, a resident named Mike Novasio, who lives in the Seattle area, made a call to the authorities. When he returned home, he noticed an unusual weight in one of his recycling bins, which he had left outside for collection, scheduled for April 7th. Sensing that something was wrong, he decided to investigate further. Upon opening the bin, he was shocked to find 3 translucent plastic bags, one of which contained what appeared to be human remains. Alarmed, he promptly notified the authorities. Upon their arrival, the police and medical examiner carefully examined the contents of the bags. Inside, they discovered a human head, a foot, an arm with a hand, and a lower leg. Despite the absence of decomposition, the facial features were still discernible, allowing for the identification of the remains as belonging to Ingrid Line. In the following days, additional fragments of Ingrid's remains were found. Some were discovered at a recycling facility, while others were located in a cooler at a different site. Unfortunately, not all of Ingrid's remains were recovered. During a search of Ingrid's home, the police found Mariners game tickets on her laptop, dated April 8th. It was inferred that Ingrid and John had attended the game scheduled for 7:10 p.m. on April 11th. John was brought in for questioning following his arrest. During the interrogation, he admitted to knowing Ingrid and revealed that they had been dating for approximately a month after meeting online. He stated that he typically spent the night at her residence, but on that particular night, he did not, as her children were due to return the following day. He recounted that they went to a bar following the Mariners game before driving back to her residence in her car. He admitted to having little recollection of events thereafter, attributing it to being heavily intoxicated. John mentioned they engaged in sexual activity that night and remembered Ingrid's peculiar behavior, but beyond that, his memory was hazy. When questioned about his actions afterward, he claimed uncertainty, but speculated that he likely slept on a downtown Seattle sidewalk, waking up there the next morning. He surmised that Ingrid had driven him to the city center of Seattle before departing. John expressed to authorities that he was not of sound mind, struggling with alcohol dependency, and currently without a permanent residence. John underwent a physical examination, and his injuries were documented through photographs. Scratches were observed on his left hand and forehead, while cuts were present on his mouth and chin, along with scrapes on his chest. His ex-girlfriend informed authorities that she had encountered him on April 9th, noting a swollen and injured lip. Despite claiming he was robbed, he still had his wallet. On April 20th, the police found Ingrid's vehicle in Belltown, just outside of Seattle. However, John's account contradicted the evidence. When they searched the car, the authorities found garbage bags identical to the ones containing the body parts. Additionally, 3 fingerprints lifted from the driver's door handle were sent for testing, and the results matched those of John Charlton. John Charlton was arrested by the authorities on suspicion of committing first-degree murder against Ingrid, as well as stealing her vehicle. The case against John heavily depended on circumstantial evidence. Despite this, he pleaded not guilty. During his defense, John's legal team argued the lack of physical evidence connecting him to Ingrid's murder. Initially, John denied any knowledge of Ingrid's fate that night, but later changed his plea to guilty before the trial. Based on the evidence presented during court proceedings, the prosecution contended that John strangled Ingrid to death within her residence before dismembering her body in her bathtub using a pruning saw. Following the dismemberment, John purportedly disposed of Ingrid's remains across various locations in Seattle. Ingrid's death was officially classified as a homicide by the medical examiner. During the investigation of her residence, authorities found an almost empty package of plastic bags similar to those in which her body parts were discovered across Seattle. Ingrid's bathroom yielded a 15-inch pruning saw suspected to have been used in the dismemberment process. Upon inspecting the area beneath the bathtub, police uncovered human remains. John Charlton received the maximum sentence permitted under the state's sentencing guidelines, which amounted to a prison term of just over 27 years. However, Judge Julie Spector of the King County Superior Court conveyed her wish to impose a life sentence, if possible, underscoring the brutal and cruel nature of John's actions. Beyond anyone's belief, during his sentencing, John addressed the court and Ingrid's family, expressing his remorse with the words, "I'm truly sorry." Prior to the charges related to homicide, John had a history of criminal convictions, including aggravated robbery, felony theft, grand theft auto, fourth-degree assault, and third-degree theft. Additionally, he was arrested for burglary. John's past was marked by turmoil. In 2006, his parents, Rye and Joanne Charlton, expressed concerns for their safety due to their son's drunken behavior. This prompted them to obtain a temporary protection order against him. John disclosed to them that he was feeling overwhelmed by life's pressures and experiencing psychological instability. Court records indicate that on March 2, 2006, John was intoxicated and aggressive, attempting to provoke a confrontation with his parents. Reports suggest that he was found intoxicated and behaving aggressively towards them in their residence, posing a physical and verbal threat. During this period, Rye recalled an incident where John forced his wife to watch the movie Hannibal, which he had retrieved from a shelf, warning her to watch this and be cautious. Court documents also revealed John's parents' concerns about his potential crack cocaine use, along with their observation that he holds grudges for years and becomes frustrated and intimidating when under the influence of alcohol or drugs, causing fear of violence. It was upon the request of John's parents that the petition for the protection order was eventually withdrawn. Friends of Ingrid speculate that she ventured into online dating because, as a single parent juggling 2 young daughters and a demanding full-time nursing job, it seemed like a convenient way to meet someone amidst her hectic routine. Ingrid's untimely death left a profound void in the lives of her loved ones, whose grief knows no bounds. Their pain is a testament to the irreparable loss of a cherished mother, daughter, and friend. In the aftermath, the community rallied around Ingrid's family, offering support and solidarity in their time of need. Their resilience in the face of tragedy is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Though Ingrid's life was tragically cut short, her memory lives on in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. May her story serve as a cautionary tale, inspiring us to prioritize safety and vigilance in the digital age. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcaino. Gabriela Alcaino was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, Chile, to Federico Alcaino and Carolina Donoso Campos. She was their only child and the first grandchild in a large, loving family. Her uncle Rodrigo became her godfather and was very close to her, just like her grandfather Carlos, who cherished her. Gabriela grew up in a middle-class family that valued education and provided her with a good upbringing, despite not being wealthy. When Gabriela was just 5 years old, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who dedicated herself to raising her. Her father remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained involved in her life. Gabriela was a kind, friendly, and open child who was a bit shy and modest, but she made friends easily and got along with her peers. She had a lovely appearance that earned her admiration and delight from everyone around her. Gabriela excelled in school, loved music, dancing, and drawing, and her parents encouraged her talents. She enjoyed spending time with her younger brothers at her father's house, which was nearby. And overall, her childhood was a happy and carefree time surrounded by loving family members. At 15, Gabriela fell in love for the first time with Fabian, a fellow student at her school who was only a year older. They started out as a happy couple, walking hand in hand, eating ice cream and stealing kisses. Fabian came from a good family, and his parents were well respected and wanted the best for him. However, Fabian himself was quiet and secretive, avoiding eye contact and preferring not to talk to others. This led many to assume he was shy, but it's likely he struggled with social anxiety. When Gabriela introduced Fabian to her father, he approved of her choice, seeing Fabian as calm, responsible, and rational. The father had a serious talk with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriela and promising not to harm her or let others harm her. Fabian promised to do so. At first, their relationship was loving and calm, with Fabian genuinely trying to be attentive and caring. However, this peace didn't last. After a few months, Fabian's true nature emerged, and he became controlling and cruel. He tried to dictate every aspect of Gabriela's life, became jealous, and decided who she could and couldn't hang out with. He monitored her phone, demanding immediate responses to his calls and messages, and would throw tantrums if she didn't comply. For the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriela downplayed her boyfriend Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, thinking they were temporary and that he would eventually go back to being the kind and caring person she fell in love with. She tried to accommodate all his demands, hoping that his behavior would improve. However, Fabian only became more aggressive and volatile over time. He started to emotionally wear Gabriela down, and his abuse eventually escalated beyond verbal aggression. He would physically intimidate her, slapping her, pulling her hair, and grabbing her hands. Although these actions often left no visible marks, friends began to notice bruises on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. As Gabriela struggled to cope with the abuse, she became withdrawn and depressed. Her friends and family noticed the change in her, seeing the tears in her eyes and the sadness that had replaced her former smile. She started distancing herself from others, avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from speaking to. Gabriela repeatedly tried to have conversations with her boyfriend Fabian, but it was unsuccessful. She even broke up with him multiple times, only to be coerced back into the relationship by Fabian. This pattern of breakups, stalking, and threats continued for over a year. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. He was accused of abuse and assault, and faced possible jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school, forced to complete his education through homeschooling. After this event, Gabriella finally decided to end the toxic relationship for good. However, Fabian refused to accept it. He apologized, made empty promises to change, and begged her to take him back. When Gabriella rejected him, Fabian resorted to stalking, blackmail, and threats in an attempt to control her and maintain their relationship. Fabian stalked Gabriella at her school and home, even attempting to break into her bedroom through the window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, making constant threats and tearful apologies in an effort to control her. Despite his harassment, Gabriella remained firm in her decision to end the relationship. Fabian would occasionally vanish for weeks, giving Gabriella a glimmer of hope that he had finally moved on. However, he would inevitably reappear, terrorizing her and refusing to leave her be. He followed her everywhere, showing up unexpectedly and causing disturbing scenes. As a result, Gabriella became terrified of being alone, always ensuring she was accompanied by friends or family. She would go to her mother's workplace after school, and they would head home together. When she needed to travel, she would ask her father or uncle to escort her. This ordeal continued for months, leaving Gabriella drained and exhausted, though she tried not to show it. A series of tragic events began in early 2018, when the Alcano family was devastated by a terrible crime. A burglar broke into Federico's home, where his second wife lived, and murdered her while the children were at school, and Federico was at work. The perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior criminal record, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother stepped in to support Federico and his children during this difficult time. This tragedy temporarily shifted Gabriella's attention away from Fabian, who had mysteriously disappeared around the same time. Meanwhile, Gabriella was also busy preparing for entrance exams, driven by her ambition to attend one of Santiago's top universities and pursue a career in journalism or advertising. The tragedy was only the beginning of a series of devastating events for the Alcano family. By May 2018, Fabian, Gabriella's ex-boyfriend, began stalking her relentlessly. He would climb over her home's fence or show up at the supermarket or mall, making her feel unsafe everywhere she went. Gabriella was terrified and sent screenshots of threatening messages from Fabian to someone, pleading for help. She confessed her fear for herself and her loved ones, but chose not to tell her family about the stalking and threats, afraid of worrying them. On June 10, 2018, the Alcano family gathered at Carlos's house to celebrate his 80th birthday. However, this joyful family event would ultimately be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening seemed happy and uneventful, filled with laughter, music, and a large family meal. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and cousins, but appeared troubled and distant. Her uncle Rodrigo noticed her distress and asked if everything was all right. But Gabriella just smiled sadly, shrugged, and said she was nervous without explaining why. Her uncle chose not to press the issue, thinking she would open up when ready, but later deeply regretted this decision. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and assured her she could count on his support in any situation. Then he returned home with his younger children. This was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and his first wife alive. At around 4 a.m. on June 11th, Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, jumped over the fence of his ex-girlfriend Gabriella's house. He planned to sneak into her bedroom through the window and attack her. But just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on and the back door creaked open. Carolina, Gabriella's mother, had been awakened by the noise and was checking on the commotion. Fabian attacked her, pushing her back inside and stabbing her repeatedly. In total, he inflicted 36 stab wounds, mostly to her chest, neck, and head, leaving her with no chance of survival. Carolina managed to scream briefly, which woke up Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to investigate. As she descended, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and enraged. he grabbed her and dragged her down. Gabriella desperately tried to call emergency services on her phone, but Fabian stopped her. He then stabbed her in the chest, piercing her heart, which proved to be a fatal blow. Fabian moved Gabriella's body to the kitchen, where Carolina's lifeless body lay. He attempted to erase his traces by wiping fingerprints and cleaning bloody footprints. He then washed himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom. Finally, he quietly left the house around 5:30 a.m. without being noticed by the neighbors. After Carolina failed to show up for work for 2 days and didn't answer her phone, her colleagues became worried. She was a responsible person and wouldn't just disappear without a reason. Her boss contacted Federico, her partner, to ask if he knew what was going on. Federico was shocked and tried calling Carolina, but her phone went unanswered. He also tried calling his daughter, Gabriella's phone, but it was turned off. He then called his brother Rodrigo, who hadn't seen or spoken to the two since Carlos's birthday party. Federico rushed to Carolina's house, which looked empty, but the car was still in the garage. He walked around the house, knocking on doors and peeking through windows, but he didn't want to go inside, even though he had a spare key. Instead, he called the police and asked them to check the house. When the police arrived, they wondered why Federico hadn't used his spare key to enter the house. Federico admitted he was afraid of what he might find inside. At 11 a.m., he finally opened the door and went in with the officers. That's when they discovered the bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor. They had been dead for over a day. Federico was overwhelmed with grief and desperately called for an ambulance, pleading with someone to save his loved ones. However, the officers had to calm him down, and his agitated behavior raised suspicions. As a result, he was taken outside to a police car for further questioning. When Federico tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was being treated as the prime suspect in a double murder investigation. Rodrigo soon arrived at the scene and was shocked to find that his brother was being held by the police. He was devastated by the news of his niece's death and couldn't understand why there was no ambulance or any medical assistance being provided. Both Federico and Rodrigo were taken in for questioning, and their alibis were thoroughly investigated. Fortunately, they were eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, as it was established that they were with their family at the time of the crime. Further investigation revealed that Gabriella had been stalked by her ex-boyfriend, with friends providing evidence of threatening messages and voice recordings. Federico remembered the obsessed suitor his daughter had tried to break up with, but he never thought the seemingly harmless boy she had introduced to him was capable of such a horrific crime. The police investigation into Fabian Cesar, the young man, revealed that he had gotten rid of the murder weapon and thrown away clothes with bloodstains. Despite this, his shoes still had tiny blood drops on them, and the pattern on the soles matched prints found at the crime scene. Furthermore, 4 of Gabriella's classmates came forward to say they had heard Fabian threaten Gabriella, stating he would rather kill her than let her go. As the evidence and witness statements mounted, Fabian was forced to admit to the crime. However, he tried to present himself as a lovesick individual who had not meant to harm Gabriella, but rather just wanted to talk to her. He claimed that things got out of control, and he ended up dealing with her mother, who unfortunately became an unwanted witness. After completing the autopsies and necessary tests, the authorities returned the bodies of the victims to their families for burial. At the funeral, hundreds of people gathered to pay their respects to the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was buried in the white dress she had always wanted to wear, and Carolina's casket was closed due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired an experienced lawyer who built a strong defense, promising a reduced sentence during the preliminary hearings. The lawyer highlighted Fabian's young age and clean criminal record, arguing that the dispute with his classmate had been resolved out of court. However, the victim's family demanded that Fabian be charged with femicide. The prosecution rejected this charge, as according to Chilean law, femicide only applies when the perpetrator and victim are spouses or live together, which was not the case for the two teenagers. Fabian's lawyer claimed that he had acted impulsively and under distress, which could lead to a potential 15-year sentence for double homicide and assault. The Allen family, understandably, wanted the harshest punishment for him. Following the initial court hearings, the judge gave both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested that he be released pending trial, but the judge denied this request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious, having lost 3 women close to him to violent deaths. The lawyer tried to blame the victims, and the authorities seemed willing to accept this. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, along with women's rights organizations, developed a proposal for Gabriella's law. This law would expand the definition of femicide to include cases where the victims were in romantic relationships with their killers, even if they weren't married or living together. The proposed bill faced opposition because it would mean that perpetrators already in prison for similar crimes could face new charges and lose their eligibility for early release. However, feminist organizations across the country supported the Alim family, staging marches and demonstrations in favor of Gabriella's law. In August 2019, Chile's government introduced amendments to its femicide law, over a year after the devastating murders. These amendments, known as Gabriella's law, included 15 key changes that were later approved by Congress. Under this new law, femicide is defined as any violent act, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to gender-based hatred, regardless of her relationship with the perpetrator. The law also considers additional circumstances, such as the victim being a minor or having health issues, to be aggravating factors. In April 2022, Fabian Ceres went on trial for attacking his ex-girlfriend and her mother 4 years prior. Thanks to Gabriella's law, the defense had no grounds to challenge the charges. Fabian was subsequently convicted of femicide under aggravating circumstances, as one of the victims was a minor, and also of double homicide and assault. On April 20th, Fabian received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car's seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. A vengeful ex-partner's sudden return can be petrifying, with the possibility of violence looming. On a seemingly ordinary day, a couple's joyous outing turned tragic as gunshots rang out, leaving them lifeless on the ground. A few people were killed in a parking lot near the church. There was outrage and panic as parishioners heard gunshots, but did not see the full horror. Police arrived and examined the scene, finding two victims, a young married couple. We'll start by examining the lives of our heroes and delving into the details of the situation they found themselves in. We'll also discuss whether their tragic end could have been avoided. When lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness become an integral part of someone's mindset, it drives them to commit unthinkable crimes. In fact, an entire family can be drawn into such crimes, causing the collapse of many lives. The brutal double murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Nathan was a father who had moved closer to his daughter to be near her. However, he had to obtain official custody and legal visitation rights with the help of a lawyer during this difficult period. It was during this time that he met Crystal, a childhood friend. Crystal had dreamed of graduating from university, but instead got married and had a family with 4 children. When the marriage ended in divorce, Crystal and her children returned to their hometown. Nathan and Crystal met at a time that was ideal for both of them. Nathan was drawn to Crystal's children and her positive outlook. They got married in 2013, with Nathan working in a warehouse and Crystal starting a thriving clothing and jewelry business. The family prospered, and they were able to hire a lawyer to assist Nathan in obtaining visitation rights with his daughter from a previous relationship. The daughter, Madison, was excited about her father's new wife and siblings. However, Madison's maternal grandparents, Lita and Paula Westfall, were resentful and worried about losing their only grandchild. In 2012, Kristen Westfall, Madison's mother, had applied for full custody with the support of her parents. The custody battle continued for 2 years, but Crystal's arrival in Nathan's life altered the entire situation. The judge granted Nathan visitation rights in October 2013. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal arrived at a church service, planning to take their 6-year-old daughter Madison for a walk afterwards to retrieve pre-prepared gifts. As they left the church, they were shot and killed in a brutal execution-style attack. The investigation revealed that Nathan had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle and also in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, suggesting the involvement of 2 shooters. The investigators were surprised by the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family, the Westfalls, who seemed to be overly dramatizing the tragedy while concealing their satisfaction over the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall even went into a seizure, seemingly unable to accept the news of Nathan's death. A grown man who had spent years trying to remove Nathan's influence from his daughter's life was so distraught that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview came across as a little unsettling. She was the only member of the family who maintained a very composed and natural demeanor, despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to provide some rather peculiar details about him, seemingly trying to emphasize only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him in Montana. Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs, and one day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle, and the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. As an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father Paul, a couple of miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal, so his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. However, until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid, seemed to the investigators very strange, and played it left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones over a short period of time helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife Kristen Westfall and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westfall family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westfall family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people, or whether a hired killer did it. The researchers took a different approach and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake since she was still with a family that could pose a threat to her. The police, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, went to remove the child from the home, but they faced a wave of protests and outrage. The behavior of the older Westfall family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room, and the culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westfall was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, Kristen continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her, even in 2014, with the injunctions in place. After a search of the Westfalls' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody, and additional evidence found led to the Westfalls' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westfalls' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case in March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church. Authorities made 4 arrests: Kristen Westfall, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Lita Westfall, were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder, and cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. The police used some deceptive tactics to put pressure on the most vulnerable member of the Westfall family, 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if found guilty, all his family members would be sentenced to life in prison, while the direct perpetrators would face the death penalty. Cameron, being young and compassionate, became very afraid and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, disclosing all the details of the incident. The crime against the young couple, the Maddoxes, turned out to be a carefully pre-planned attack by the Westfall family gang. Their motive was to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting incident, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife, Kristen, had been engaged in a nasty custody dispute over their 5-year-old daughter Madison, with Kristen's family supporting her. The prolonged and expensive legal battle was expected to end favorably for Nathan. However, the Westfalls were concerned about this outcome and meticulously plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter, alone, but the Westfalls were not interested in letting her go, even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westfalls were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led Kristen to come up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. Kristen initially attempted to find someone to kill her ex-husband, but when that plan failed, she and her father decided to take matters into their own hands. On a typical Sunday, the family attended church, and January 18th was no different. Lita Westfall, accompanied by young Madison, arrived at the scheduled service time. Afterward, Lita had to hand the girl over to her father. Meanwhile, Kristen and Paul went to a remote store, where they posed as customers to be captured on CCTV cameras, aiming to establish a solid alibi. However, they misjudged the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play for the entire interval. They communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddoxes' movements. Lita, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Crystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea, and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons, which divers later retrieved, confirming Cameron's words. The police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Letha acting as willing accomplices. Given that Letha was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Crystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts as they left the church, while Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets. Letha and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy, with each member of the Westfall family tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to exhibit seizure-like behavior, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent, but that verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Crystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a plea bargain with the district attorney's office to avoid the death penalty. Paul pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Letha also pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity instead of going to trial. Letha will not be eligible for parole until 2046 and is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty to all the accusations against her, stating that her whole family was crazy and she was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, PA, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Crystal Maddox was the custody of their daughter, Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted, as she wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself and through the child. The trial took over a week, and with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty of capital murder. After 8 hours of deliberation, Kristen Westfall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. While Paul, Letha, and Kristen Westfall were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder, officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westfall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence, and the judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron testifying against his family. Cameron faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime and claimed he had nothing to do with it. But the investigation didn't rule out the possibility that he knew more than he was saying. as he lived in the house with his family and couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. Her entire family, her brother Cameron and her parents Lloyd Paul and Lita Westfall, were involved in the crime. This case was complicated as the community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Lita, and Cameron Westfall made a deal with the investigation after agreeing to testify against the sister. Cameron took a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence the following year. A judge also sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder under the plea agreement and would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westfall, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole in a fateful decision. The victim's daughter, Madison Maddox, lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. After the Westfall family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. The people in the town were devout, went to church, and they also easily killed people, covering themselves with concern for the girl. The older generation of Westfall fulfilled the wish of their daughter and helped to commit this terrible crime. Nathan was not a bad or mean person. He loved his own daughter and strove to be a good father to her. Obviously, in addition to the custody battle, the hatred associated with the fact that the girl's father had created a new family and was able to pick up his mind and start a new life without crime comes first, and was perfectly happy with the new woman, having something he didn't have in his past relationship with Kristen. That's what was causing all the negativity from the ex-wife, and she was able to turn her entire family against him. If it was just about custody, they wouldn't have killed Nathan's new woman. After all, the Madison custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship. There is certainly only one loser in the history of the Westfall versus Maddox fight. Of course, it's Madison. I'd like to believe that when she grows up, she won't remember the wild selfishness with which adults tried to take advantage of her by saying words about love. After all, if the family had loved the child, they would have tried to build a normal relationship for her sake, but they were only acting to please their own egos. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent person who experienced a challenging time when her parents divorced at the age of 9. During this period, she took on a maternal role, caring for her 5 siblings and protecting them. Ashley's faith was the cornerstone of her life. As a devout Mormon and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, she turned to her faith in God for strength and comfort during difficult times. Her unwavering belief provided her with a sense of peace, resilience, and determination, enabling her to overcome obstacles and face challenges with courage. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of his parents' divorce at a young age. However, he found solace in the Mormon faith and was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints at 17. Ashley was immediately drawn to Emmett's charm, and he reciprocated her feelings. Emmett was immediately smitten with Ashley's intelligence when they first met, and he quickly realized she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He confided in his closest friends about his feelings, and their relationship blossomed over the next few months. During Christmas in 2008, Emmett proposed to Ashley, and to his delight, she accepted. The couple tied the knot in a Mormon temple, surrounded by their shared values and beliefs. The ceremony was a beautiful expression of their commitment to each other and their faith. As newlyweds, Emmett and Ashley were filled with joy and excitement as they began their new life together. Their marriage was built on a foundation of stability and happiness, which is deeply rooted in Mormon values. In the Mormon faith, marriage is considered a sacred and eternal bond that transcends mortal life. While divorce is not entirely ruled out, it is strongly discouraged and only permitted under specific extreme circumstances. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett had twin daughters, and they were thrilled to start their journey as parents. Emmett loved being a father and cherished every moment with his girls. Ashley was happy to be living the life she always wanted. At the time, they were college students at Utah State University, and they managed to balance school with taking care of their babies. Although they faced challenges, their faith and love for each other helped them overcome difficulties. With determination, they pushed through and worked towards a better future. In 2009, Emmett graduated from Utah State University with high honors, went to law school, and passed the bar exam, becoming a bankruptcy attorney. During this time, Ashley stayed at home to care for their growing family, while Emmett focused on building his career. Ashley Corgan took on the role of managing the household and raising their 4 young children. To outsiders, the Corgan family appeared to have a perfect life, a beautiful home, multiple kids, and a fulfilling career for Emmett. But beneath the surface, things were different. In August 2010, Emmett began to feel overwhelmed by the financial burden of providing for his family of 6. To remedy this, Emmett decided to start his own business, a criminal defense firm. Through a friend, he met Candy Hall, a reputable paralegal with experience in criminal law. The two met for lunch and got along well, leading Emmett to hire her for his firm. Candy was married to Robert Hall, a hard worker and devoted father. When Candy landed the job at Emmett's firm, she was initially thrilled, and her husband and children were happy for her. As the stress of building a business and raising their large family took its toll, Ashley noticed a change in her marriage to Emmett. He was overwhelmed by his responsibilities and saw a release by spending excessive time at the gym, often at inconvenient times that left Ashley to care for their 4 children alone. Despite their growing distance, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior was different from when their other children were born. He began spending more and more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley confided in her sister, expressing her genuine concern that Emmett's activities might be evidence of infidelity. Emmett's assistant, Candy Hall, was facing marital problems similar to Ashley's. Candy confided in a friend that her husband Rob was jealous of her working for the charming Emmett. The constant arguing was putting a strain on their relationship. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, but Emmett didn't join her. Instead, he claimed to be at a bodybuilding competition, leaving Ashley to take care of their children by herself. Ashley felt anxious about her marriage, wondering if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Since divorce wasn't an option, she decided to work on improving their relationship. With a fresh resolve on March 11th, Ashley aimed to restore unity to her home. Ashley was determined to repair her strained relationship with her husband Emmett. She spent the entire day planning a perfect evening, attending to every detail to make it special. She cooked his favorite meal, tidied the house, and reminded the children to be on their best behavior. Ashley set the table and waited for Emmett to arrive home from work at 6 p.m. However, he walked in 2 hours late. When she tried to greet him with a kiss, he turned away, leaving her feeling cold. Despite his aloofness and the growing distance between them, Ashley was resolute in her mission to rekindle Emmett's love for her. She firmly believed that their love was worth fighting for and was willing to do whatever it took to salvage their relationship. 2 hours after she had finished preparing dinner, the family finally gathered around the table to eat. But to Ashley's dismay, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry. Ashley prepared a meal for her husband Emmett, but he showed little interest, leaving her disappointed and hurt. When he claimed he needed to go to Walgreens, Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay and talk. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was going through a tough time in her marriage to Rob Hall. That same day, Rob decided to pack his bags and leave their home, marking the end of their relationship. Rob had a strong bond with his loved ones, but he needed space. One evening, Rob asked his daughter if she'd borrowed his ex-wife Candy's car. She said no. Later, she drove past Walgreens, saw Candy's car, and called her dad to let him know. Rob's casual response hit a profound impact on two families. Ashley lay awake in bed, her heart filled with worry as she prayed for her marriage to succeed. Despite her efforts to reach him, Emmett wasn't responding to her texts and calls, causing her great unease. Her instincts told her something was wrong, and she felt a sense of dread. Meanwhile, at around 1 p.m., a 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in the Walgreens parking lot. The police responded quickly, unsure of what they would find. They didn't know if it was a random shooting, a botched drug deal, a robbery, or something else. As the first officer approached the scene, he was met with a disturbing sight. A lifeless body on the ground, and another person, wounded and clutching their head in pain. The injured person was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound, leaving the police with many unanswered questions. Amidst the chaos, the police were wanted to speak with one woman in particular, Candy Hall, who was present at the crime scene. Candy identified the man in the hospital as her husband Rob, and the deceased man as her boss Emmett. Emmett had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after Emmett's body was discovered in the Walgreens parking lot, his wife Ashley received a knock on her door. When she answered, police officers broke the devastating news to her. Her husband Emmett was dead, a victim of a shooting. Ashley was shocked and distraught, unable to fathom what had led to this tragic event. The police then asked Ashley if she was familiar with Rob and Candy Hall. Ashley revealed that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant, but she had long suspected that the two were having an affair. The police brought Candy in for questioning at the station, determined to piece together the events leading up to Emmett's murder and Rob's shooting. During the interrogation, Candy denied having a romantic relationship with her boss Emmett, and she vehemently rejected any suggestion of intimate relations. According to Candy, she had driven to Walgreens that night solely to pick up a prescription. Candy and Emmett met by chance in a store and decided to take a drive in Emmett's car. During the drive, Candy's phone rang. It was her estranged husband Rob. Candy told Rob she was with Emmett, which sparked Rob's jealousy and led to him making a violent threat against Emmett. After the phone call, Candy and Emmett stopped at a gas station and eventually arrived at Walgreens. When they got out of the car, Candy saw Rob waiting for them, visibly angry. The situation escalated into a heated argument and physical fight between Rob and Emmett. Amidst the chaos, Candy heard 3 loud gunshots and turned to see both men on the ground. She saw a gun lying nearby, picked it up and threw it away. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired the first shots. Rob, who suffered a superficial gunshot wound to the head, was treated at the hospital and then interviewed by detectives. He told them that the gun found at the scene was his, and that it fell out of his pocket during the fight with Emmett at Walgreens. According to Rob, Emmett dove for the gun, and they struggled over it, resulting in Emmett shooting him in the head. Rob claimed he didn't know who shot Emmett during the struggle. The detectives weren't surprised that Rob didn't remember much due to his head wound from the gunshot. However, they did wonder if Emmett had fired the first shot, considering he ended up dead. To get to the bottom of the incident, which occurred in the Walgreens parking lot, the detectives checked the security footage. Upon reviewing the footage, they saw Rob Hall arrive at the parking lot at 9:55 p.m. 1 minute later, he entered the Walgreens store, rushing through each aisle as if searching for someone. The footage then showed Rob leaving the store at 10:06 p.m. and parking his car beside the candy section, where he waited for several minutes. 10 minutes after the shooting, Emmett's truck appeared on security footage as it pulled into the parking lot, but the shooting itself wasn't caught on camera. Although Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied having a romantic relationship with her boss, co-workers whispered that they were more than just colleagues. In fact, co-workers often saw Candy and Rob spending time together in Rob's office, with the door closed. Just 3 weeks after she started her job, detectives made a surprising discovery. Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss divorcing Rob. During their investigation, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This didn't surprise many of Emmett's loved ones, as he was obsessed with bodybuilding and had been acting strangely, leading them to suspect he was using steroids. When Candy gave her statement to the detectives, she described a distinctive pattern of gunshots that suggested Rob had shot and killed Emmett twice before turning the gun on himself. This evidence was enough for the detectives to obtain an arrest warrant for Rob Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Rob was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Rob's actions were severe. If convicted, he faced life in prison without parole or the death penalty. As the trial approached, Ashley, Emmett's wife, hoped it would bring her some closure. She believed that understanding her husband's infidelity and death would help her heal. Prosecutors argued that Rob was angry at Emmett for having an affair with Candy and blamed Emmett for ruining his marriage. According to the prosecution, Rob shot Emmett and then killed himself. However, Rob's defense team told a different story. They claimed Emmett was the aggressor on the night he died, and that he had a history of steroid abuse. They alleged that during the altercation, Emmett grabbed Rob's gun and shot Rob before Rob regained possession and killed Emmett in self-defense. One of the key witnesses in Rob's trial was his wife, Candy. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. Instead of hearing 2 rapid gunshots followed by another, she claimed to have heard a pop, followed by 2 more rapid pops. This new version of events supported the defense's argument that Emmett shot Rob first. To prove Rob was the shooter, prosecutors presented forensic evidence that the type of weapon used in the parking lot shooting left significant gunshot residue, GSR, after firing. Investigators tested Rob and Emmett for GSR and found that Rob's left palm had 32 particles, his right palm had 23, while Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. The forensic evidence proved that Rob was the one who fired the gun 3 times, and Emmett never possessed the weapon. After careful consideration, the jury found Rob Hall not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder, which means the murder was not premeditated. The judge sentenced Rob to 30 years in prison. Rob will be eligible for parole in 2028 when he is 58 years old. Despite the conviction, Rob maintains his innocence and appealed his conviction in 2021, but the Idaho Supreme Court denied him a retrial. 2 months after Emmett's murder, Candy Hall was arrested and charged with embezzlement for allegedly stealing money from her previous employer. This charge was unrelated to Emmett's murder. Candy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to imprisonment, released on parole in 2014, and remains on probation until 2026. In an interview, Candy expressed deep feelings of guilt over the incident, mainly due to its impact on her relationships with her children. She hopes to prove to them that it was a regrettable mistake. Ashley struggled to come to terms with her husband's murder by his lover's husband. In a 2015 interview, she faced Candy Hall for the first time. Despite her emotional pain, Ashley decided to move on and create a new life. She moved out of town with their 5 children, who gradually adjusted to the change and found joy again. Ashley eventually remarried, had 2 more children, and now blogs for victims of trauma. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand, can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Auckland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Harmon and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Harmon Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Harmon completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Harmon was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and a measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Harmon and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash cannon and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to the cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was. But it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body. But an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Venning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on two families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time, so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney Stuart Grieve said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out, because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. The events described in this video took place in 2008 in Auburn, Alabama, USA. Although 15 years have passed since then, the final word in the Lauren Burke case has yet to be spoken. Lauren Ashley Burke was born December 30th, 1989 in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivian Gershon, later divorced. Lauren had a sister, Jacqueline Burke, and a brother, Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren went to Auburn University where she studied graphic design, was an active member of Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and was generally active in the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a well-liked, excellent student, always smiling, happy, and helpful. While still a high school student, Lauren started dating a guy named Sean McQuaid. After high school, they both enrolled at Auburn University, where they continued their relationship. At this point in life, getting an education was a priority for both young people, but that didn't stop them from making plans for their future together. Unfortunately, however, not all of Lauren's plans and dreams were destined to come true. She started the morning of March 4th, 2008, by having breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend Sean. At 11 o'clock, Lauren went to class, after which she called her father James to discuss plans for the spring break and a visit to the dentist. After finishing her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm, where she stayed until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., she had an appointment with her classmate Michael. They were to meet in the library and prepare a study assignment together. When Lauren, around 8 p.m., left Sean's room, it was already dark outside. Her car, a black 2001 Honda Civic, was parked in the parking lot next to the dorm, and she moved towards it. That was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, started calling her cell phone after she didn't show up for her appointment, but Lauren didn't answer for some reason. He kept calling over and over, and finally he heard Lauren's voice on the other end. She said she wasn't coming to the library because she'd forgotten all about the appointment, and then she hung up. A little later, at about 9 p.m., 911 received a call about an injured girl who had been seen lying on the road between the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. It was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars in the roadway, blocking traffic in both directions. Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road, taking slow, deep breaths. She was suffocating. There were many wounds on her body and only socks on her feet. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived on the scene, at which point Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Lauren into the ambulance, her pulse was barely palpable. At 9:35 p.m., Lauren was taken to East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began trying to save her life. 8 minutes earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers received multiple reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were immediately sent to the address the callers gave. Unable to find the owner of the burning car among the crowd of curious students attracted by the fire from their dormitories, police checked the license plates and discovered that the owner of the car was someone named James Burke, a resident of Georgia. James Burke is Lauren's father. The police contacted James by phone and learned that the actual owner of the fire-ravaged Honda was his daughter, Lauren, who attends Auburn University. James immediately asked what was wrong with his daughter, but the police officers had nothing to say. They didn't know where Lauren was and told James that no one was in the burning car. After James talked to the police officer, he immediately started calling his daughter's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only added to his anxiety. Unable to reach Lauren, James first called friends of his daughter that he knew, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then called his ex-wife and Lauren's mother, Vivian Gershon, hoping that maybe she knew where their daughter might be. Lauren's mother didn't know anything about what had happened either. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean. That's how Sean found out that Lauren was missing and that her car had been burned. Sean, calling mutual acquaintances of Lauren and trying to find out if anyone had seen her that evening, learned that she had canceled a meeting at the library saying she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew for a fact that Lauren hadn't forgotten about her appointment for the evening, as when she left his room about 2 hours ago, she had planned to go straight to the library. While family and friends tried to figure out where Lauren had gone, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were battling to keep her alive. Since Lauren was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or documents, the doctors did not know her name. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Lauren's life. She was pronounced dead about an hour after being admitted to the medical facility. The cause of her passing was a single bullet wound. The bullet, which had traveled out, had punctured both of Lauren's lungs. Experts concluded that the muzzle of the gun was only a few inches from Lauren's skin at the time of the shot. Police officers, comparing the girl's passing at the hospital and the burned-out car on campus, whose owner was missing, quickly realized that the victim, who could not be saved by doctors, was Lauren Burke. The very next day, March 5, 2008, James Burke identified the body of his daughter after visiting from Atlanta. News of Lauren's passing quickly spread around campus. Auburn University released a statement about Lauren Burke's passing, urging students and staff to be extra cautious on and off campus, but assuring them that the campus is safe. Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety, the statement said. The Delta Gamma Society released a statement about what fraternity representatives called an unexpected and disturbing crime. The society urged Sisters of the Auburn branch to cooperate fully with detectives while they sort out what happened. While Lauren's family and friends were grieving, police were trying to figure out who took her life, how the car fire was connected to it, and whether other students should be wary. Both the spot along the road where Lauren Burke was found and the area around her car were processed for evidence. We have put every resource we can into finding the person responsible for this crime, said Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer. Auburn, Alabama is a relatively quiet student community, and we take these things to heart. If someone gets hurt or dies, we all feel it, and we won't rest until we find the perpetrator. Stouffer also said that Alabama Governor Bob Riley offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in Burke's case. Lauren's charred car was taken to the Auburn Police Department. Investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office sifted through the remains of the car's burned interior. They found scraps of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, which could mean the interior of the car was the scene of the crime, and the perpetrator had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend. None of them could name a single person who wanted to harm Lauren and was capable of doing so. Knowing that before her passing, Lauren was in a dorm at Sean's, the investigators searched his room, but nothing was found to link Sean to the crime. After speaking with Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet in the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his phone, he heard a noise similar to that of a moving car. At the same time, it emerged that someone had used Lauren's bank card several times, shortly after she was found lying in the road. In all likelihood, the person who had Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, and the police began looking for him. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, at 9:55 a.m. on March 7, 2008, in the parking lot of the Walmart supermarket in Noonan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn, a man of African descent attacked a 72-year-old woman as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and told her to get in the passenger seat. He himself got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away from the parking lot, but noticed that an eyewitness to the attack was following him, talking to someone on the phone. The thought of the bystander calling the police prompted the perpetrator to return to the Walmart parking lot. He stopped and got out of the stolen vehicle, ran over to a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, got in, and fled the scene in a hurry. A few hours later, 4 officers chased the fleeing Chrysler at high speed toward Columbus, West Georgia. The driver did not respond in any way to stop, endangering other road users. During the chase, police observed the driver of the Chrysler throwing an object out the window. One of the chase crews stopped and searched for the object. Police officers found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the chase continued, but at one point, the perpetrator's vehicle broke down and smoke billowed from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the roadway and opened the door. Next, a police officer, who was in pursuit on a motorcycle, crashed into the open door. After the collision, the officer flew over the handlebars of the motorcycle and fell to the pavement, only fortunately not seriously injured. The road where the perpetrator stopped was through a forest, and it was into the woods that he rushed to flee. He could not escape, however. The police quickly caught up with him and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Courtney Laurel Lockhart was born on October 20th, 1984. In the words of his family, he was a nice, fun-loving guy until he joined the U.S. Army. He was sent to Iraq in 2004, from which he returned as someone else in 2005, according to his mother. "He wasn't the Courtney I knew," his mother said. Courtney was a cheerful guy, but after he returned from Iraq, he never smiled again, never let anyone stand behind him, and sometimes hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Lockhart and his girlfriend, with whom he had by this time broken up, had a daughter. Also in 2006, he was court-martialed for assaulting other soldiers, using illegal substances, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 approached, Lockhart was said to have gone increasingly off the rails. He barely showered, stopped visiting his daughter, and was heavily addicted to illegal substances. Beginning in February 2008, he committed a string of burglaries, and with the exception of a convenience store robbery, his methods were always the same. He would approach the victim from behind as she was getting into her car in the parking lot, threaten her with a gun, demand that she give him her purse, and attempt to take possession of the car. One such crime ended taking the life of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults stopped on March 7, 2008, after he attacked a 72-year-old woman and failed to evade a police chase. After his arrest, Courtney Lockhart, 23, was taken to the police station, where he confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Lauren Burke's life. The interrogation was videotaped and became a key piece of evidence at trial. Plus, Lauren's personal belongings such as her iPod and bank cards were found in his car. He gave a detailed account of the events of the day he kidnapped Lauren. It was Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Lockhart woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring. He had spent the previous night in his car, not far from East Alabama Medical Center. He needed money, so he started driving around Auburn looking for another victim. It's worth noting that all the people he attacked were women, none of them men. His drive ended on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked next to the student dorms. He spent several hours sitting in his car watching the students. Around 8 p.m., he noticed some girl walk up to the car parked next to him and leisurely opened the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking long, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. Poking her with the muzzle of his gun, he asked her how much money she had on her. When he didn't get an answer, he pushed Lauren into the car, into the front passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. According to Lockhart, Lauren said nothing but screamed in fear. When she finally calmed down, she pulled $200 from her purse, handed it to him, and begged him to leave. Instead of leaving, however, he ordered Lauren to take off her clothes. At gunpoint and hearing threats against her, Lauren complied, stripping off everything but a pair of socks. According to Lockhart, there was only one reason he made Lauren undress. He thought that if she had no clothes on, she would not want to escape. Lockhart then began to drive around the streets of Auburn. All the while, he was driving with one hand on the wheel and with the other holding Lauren at gunpoint. She tried to dissuade him from committing the crime, and when he said his life was over, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At some point, her phone started ringing. Lockhart told her to answer it and make something up so no one would suspect anything. It was a call from Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library. When she answered, she said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up right away. Lockhart said that they continued to drive through the streets of the city, and Lauren wouldn't give up trying to talk him into letting her go. She said she would help him overcome the difficulties he was facing. As they were driving down Highway 147, Lauren opened the door to jump out of the moving car, and at that point Lockhart said he accidentally fired a shot. As we now know, the fired bullet pierced both of Lauren's lungs, plus she sustained injuries from the fall. She managed to wave to passing drivers before her strength failed her, and she lost consciousness. Lockhart told investigators that he parked outside the church and watched as cars began to stop next to Lauren lying on the pavement. Realizing that the police would be arriving any minute, he hurriedly fled. Planning to destroy the evidence he had left in the car, he drove to a gas station and bought a can of gasoline, which he paid for with Lauren's bank card. He doused the interior of the car with the gasoline he bought, then got in and drove to the campus where he abducted Lauren because his Chrysler was parked there. According to Lockhart, as he drove, he became dizzy from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let air in from the street. You might be wondering why he didn't drive to the campus first and doused Lauren's car with gasoline there. Why did he drive on a powder keg, since a short circuit or spark could have caused the car to burn up with him? Perhaps it had something to do with Lockhart's mental problems or low IQ, but we shall talk about that a little later. Upon arriving on campus, Courtney took $46, an iPod, and her bank cards from Lauren's car before setting the car on fire and driving off in his Chrysler. He drove to a gas station where he paid for the gas with Lauren's money. He then returned to campus again to see if the car had burned all the way down. Investigators began to question whether all of Lockhart's testimony was true. They speculated that Lockhart had forced Lauren to undress, not so that she would not run away as he claimed, but for an entirely different purpose. But he could not get what he wanted because Lauren suddenly jumped out of the moving car. Also, the investigators doubted that Lockhart shot Lauren by accident. It seemed unlikely given the fact that Courtney had served in the Army and knew well how to handle a gun. It seemed more logical that Lauren realized that Lockhart wasn't going to let her go and decided that her only chance of escape was to jump. She opened the door, and as she jumped out of the car, and Lockhart shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun Lockhart had thrown out the window as he tried to evade a police chase. In addition, experts ran tests and ruled out the possibility of an accidental discharge. The trigger had to be pulled hard enough to make the shot. Lauren's family and friends bid her farewell on March 9th, the same day investigators interrogated Lockhart for the second time. The next day he was formally charged multiple times in the Lauren Burke case. The trial began on November 8, 2010. Lockhart's attorneys claimed that their client had a mental illness because of his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was accidental. According to court documents, Lockhart pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. The court was presented with the testimony of a psychologist who testified that Lockhart had an IQ of 86, which is below average, that he had some symptoms from being in combat in the military, but he did not have PTSD, and that Lockhart was immature and not thinking straight. Although the state attempted to introduce evidence of Lockhart's other crimes and his dishonorable conduct in the military, the trial judge excluded that evidence. After the guilt phase of trial, the sentencing phase immediately followed. Lockhart presented witness testimony and evidence in an attempt to cast himself as a war hero who was mentally disturbed by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury rendered a special verdict in which an additional aggravating factor was the taking of a person's life in the course of the kidnapping. The jury voted 12-0 to recommend a sentence of life without parole. The trial judge later disagreed with the jury's advisory sentence and sentenced Lockhart to death. In a 28-page sentencing order, the judge explained why he disagreed with the jury's opinion. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty. The victim was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockhart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockhart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. The court also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's crime spree and the true nature of Lockhart's military service. Although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury was unaware of the full extent of Lockhart's military disciplinary record, wrote the judge. The court reasoned that, had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama and has not given up trying to appeal his sentence. After his conviction and death sentence, he appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld the sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied Lockhart's request for a retrial. He then appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but in September 2014, his motion was again denied. In January 2015, Lockhart appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. In April of that year, the Supreme Court of the United States denied his petition. In 2018, Lockhart made another attempt to challenge the sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization who represented him tried to convince the court that the lawyers defending Lockhart in 2010 had mishandled the case. Although there were some flaws in Lockhart's 2010 defense, it ultimately did not change the outcome, with the death sentence being upheld again. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Lockhart's death sentence. Lauren's parents said they would never give up and would do everything in their power to keep Lockhart's death sentence from being overturned. Courtney Lockhart gave my daughter the death penalty. There's no reason why he shouldn't have the death penalty. That's all I have to say, Burke's father Jim said. He didn't give her a second chance. He shouldn't get a second chance either, Lauren's mother Vivian said. As of today, Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama.